Within months of September the 11th, 2001, we captured a man named Abu Zubaydah. We believe that Zubaydah was a senior terrorist leader and a trusted associate of Osama bin Laden. Zubaydah was severely wounded during the firefight that brought him into custody. These are dangerous men with unparalleled knowledge about terrorist networks and their plans of new attacks.
Abu Zubaydah has been described as a forever prisoner. He was firstly detained by the CIA in 2002 and was kept at a number of dark sites between 2002 and 2006. The first time that I ever heard about Abu Zubaydah was when I was watching episode 6 of the Adam Curtis docuseries Can't Get You Out of My Head. And in episode 6, he does this really interesting thing where he compares, or he kind of contrasts the story of Tupac and the story of Abu Zubaydah. So I'm going to show you the clips from Adam Curtis's documentary that he used to describe what happened to Abu Zubaydah.
Abu Zubaydah had been born in Saudi Arabia, but he was not a Saudi. His family were Palestinian, and he quickly discovered that if you were not a part of the Saudi elite, you were nothing. He and his family were looked down on and scorned. In the 1980s, Zubaydah grew more and more angry and lonely. He began to write a special diary into which he poured out his feelings. It was special because it was written to be read by just one person in the future, himself in the year 2000. The diary is full of a growing fury about how Saudi Arabia had been taken over and corrupted by the vast wealth that had come into the society. He describes how everyone around him, including his friends, were false and treacherous. They pretend to be pious, but really they have no values. The money has created a society where nobody believes in anything, and nothing can be trusted. Zubaydah tried to lose himself in music. The singer he loved most was Christa Berg, and his songs like The Lady in Red. But then at the end of the 1980s, Zubaydah discovered the ideas of jihad. At that point, modern Islamism was sweeping through the Arab world. The attraction of jihad was that by losing yourself in the struggle, you could free yourself from the emptiness and the nihilism that the Western money was bringing into societies like Saudi Arabia. Abu Zubaydah travelled to the town of Peshawar on the Afghan border to lose himself in the new revolutionary struggle that was going to remake the Arab world and him. One night at the end of 1991, Abu Zubaydah was part of a group of jihadists attacking the city of Gardez in Afghanistan. They were trying to overthrow the communist regime left behind by the Russians 3 years before. But then suddenly, a mortar exploded next to Abu Zubaydah, and a piece of shrapnel pierced his skull. It went into his brain, and his whole way of seeing and understanding the world suddenly changed. The next day he was taken back from the front line, over the mountains to Peshawar. For 2 months he was unconscious. Then his memories from the past began to come back, but in a mass of fragments. Nothing linked them. They made no sense. So Zubaydah began to use his diary to write down all the flashes of memory, to try and make sense of who he was. In the end, it would run to over 1,000 pages, a vast collage of memories and feelings, moments of intense loneliness as a child, of watching Pluto meet an angel in a Disney cartoon, moments of fear in combat, the smell of perfume, the anger he felt at friends, moments of sexual desire, and the sensation of autumn coming on. When he had physically recovered, Abu Zubaydah went back to the jihad training camps in Afghanistan. But he found that whatever he did, he could not put his memories back together. They remained just fragments in his brain. He also had a growing sense that the whole organisation of jihad was disintegrating into rival factions. All ideas of solidarity and collective action had gone. In the diary, he describes how you couldn't trust anyone any longer. Zubaydah knew bin Laden, who was running another jihad camp. Bin Laden asked him to make an alliance, but Zubaydah refused. He was aware that bin Laden was planning some kind of retaliation against the Americans, but he didn't trust him. Zubaydah spent his time making explosives and watching American movies like Rambo 3. Zubaydah wrote in his diary how up in the mountains everything was falling apart. The revolutionary dream of Islamism was failing. While his sense of who he was, his identity, had disintegrated into random memories. They meant nothing. There was no story that made sense. He wrote how it was as though time had stopped. He was trapped in a perpetual now, haunted by fragments of memory, with no way of moving forward into the future. When the coalition invaded Afghanistan, Abu Zubaydah had fled. He had not been involved in the attacks, but he knew that the Americans were arresting all the jihadists they could find. He travelled back over the mountains and hid in Faisalabad in Pakistan. But 2 months later, he was captured. Zubaydah was taken by the CIA to a secret prison they ran in Pakistan. He told them that he had had nothing to do with the attacks, but they didn't believe him. Then they read his diary that he had written to himself. And the CIA decided it meant that Zubaydah had a multiple personality, and that the other, hidden self, was hiding the information they desperately needed. So the CIA turned to psychology to unlock the information they knew was concealed inside his head. Positive psychology was part of the new psychology that had risen up in the 1990s. It said that millions of people were really far weaker than previously thought, that they were trapped in a state of what the psychologists called learned helplessness. And positive psychology would develop techniques to rescue these people. But psychologists working for the CIA decided they would turn the system in reverse. They would use it to reduce Abu Zubaydah back to a state of learned helplessness. They called it enhanced interrogation. And they did it by waterboarding Zubaydah 83 times, by repeatedly smashing him against the wall, and locking him naked in a freezing box for weeks at a time. The CIA videotaped the interrogations, but later destroyed the tapes. They reportedly show Abu Zubaydah screaming, shaking uncontrollably and vomiting. What was done to him became the model for a system of torture that the Americans then used across the war on terror, including the prison at Abu Ghraib. Desperate for the torture to stop, Zubaydah just spewed out all the disconnected memories inside his brain, memories that even he had not been able to piece together. They were fragmented images of what might happen in America, many of them drawn from the films he had watched, including Godzilla. And that same sense of incoherent confusion was now unleashed on America. The CIA believed them, and the fragments inside Abu Zubaydah's brain now spread out across America to create yet another wave of fear.
In Adam Curtis's documentary, he goes into he tells the really interesting and pertinent story of what happened to Abu Zubaydah and why his case is so interesting. He was first arrested, I believe, in 2002, and now at the time of making this video is 2023, and he's still being kept in captivity in Guantanamo Bay. Quite recently, I saw an article that came out in The Guardian. It was in May 2023, and this really interesting document has been released. It's from the Seton Hall University School of Law, their Center for Policy and Research, and it's a complete document about American torturers, the FBI and CIA abuses at dark sites and Guantanamo Bay, and it includes descriptions and drawings by Abu Zubaydah. And what is really interesting about this is the fact that these drawings were able to be released. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Abu Zubaydah is considered to be one of their high-value detainees who will never be released, who will probably never be released. They are held without trial, and they have never been charged with the crime, and they will never be charged with the crime. That's why they are called forever prisoners. These records that we have in the document, they actually have a complete list of all of the prisoners, I think. And then also they have the list of what they called high value detainees, which was Mr. Abu Zubaydah and 13 other individuals who were brought to Guantanamo in 2006. So this was 4 years after he was first arrested and held at various black sites and subjected to torture there. And what's really interesting and very pertinent about the report, and I do recommend you read it, as long as obviously it's incredibly horrible to read. So if you feel you can, then go ahead and read it. I'm not going to get into the details of everything that happened, because I don't want this to be a horrible triggering video. I don't know what's happening in your life right now. Maybe you don't need to hear that. But if you want to, I invite you to read it, because it's very interesting. But basically what the case proves is that torture does not work. Under extreme, intolerable amounts of pain, people will tell you anything that they think you want to hear in order to stop that pain. So actually the most important information that they got out of Abu Zubaydah was what they got, I think, at the very, very beginning, before all of these enhanced interrogation techniques were brought into play. And so why this account, these images that he has created, are so important is because the CIA has tried to destroy all video evidence of the crime. And so this is a real first-hand account of their torture program, which has survived in by one of the victims. So in this report, Abu Zubaydah memorizes his experiences and the experiences of other Guantanamo prisoners through these illustrations. He was viciously beaten, drowned, and abused, but it was much more than that as well. He was kept naked throughout the entire process. He was kept in incredibly cold environments. He was sexually humiliated. He was sexually assaulted. He had his religion insulted. He had his mind terrorized and tortured. The only image that I really want to show you is an image that I think represents psychological abuse. I think there's only one image throughout that really represents the psychological abuse that he experienced, because a lot of it is intense physical abuse. And so in the images, he shows you lots of clocks to show you that this goes on and on and on and on and on and on. When discussing waterboarding, there's actually many different ways that a person can be waterboarded. Maybe in films, we've only seen that one technique where somebody has like a kind of blanket or like a towel over somebody's face, and then the water poured on top of you to kind of stimulate the sensation of drowning. But there are many other techniques. There are many other different kind of ways that they thought up to kind of create this terrifying experience. So it says the intention and the goal of this technique is to convince you that there's nothing that you can do to save your life. Your inability to breathe is only one aspect of the abuse. You're stripped naked throughout basically the entire torture proceedings. He was stripped naked, which just exasperates this overwhelming reality that your body is not yours, that you are exposed, that you are vulnerable, that you are humiliated. And again, this was all part of the CIA strategy to try to bring a person back to this state of learned helplessness. So one of the images is called image 34, and it depicts psychological abuse. Actually, the first time that I saw this image, I thought what it was showing us is when he's just, what I thought, it was a misinterpretation, but what I thought is like when he's just sitting down and nothing is actually happening to him in his head, like this is everything that's happening. That's actually not the case. It's a psychological technique in which they leave your door open. They leave his door open. Actually, I'm not even going to get into it. I was talking to somebody about kind of making a comparison between Guantanamo and Sednaya prison in Syria, which is the worst of the prisons in Syria. In Syria, there's a kind of hierarchy of prisons, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And Sednaya is the one at the top. Sednaya is the prison that is completely underground. And basically the person I was talking to was kind of comparing the situation in Sednaya and in Guantanamo. And for me, it's not useful. I don't think it's useful at all to make a comparison between Sednaya and Guantanamo, because I don't think that it's useful to compare. I don't think it's useful to compare them. But I think what is really significant, and what I think we can take away, is the fact that Syria has a dictatorship and has had a civil war for over the last 10 years. To kind of try and overthrow Bashar and the entire institution that props him up. Because, of course, Bashar is, a puppet. America, on the other hand, considers itself to be the leader of the free world. What more hypocritical sentence have you ever heard in your entire life? And something else that I think is really significant about the Abu Zubaydah case is that Guantanamo Bay was set up in 2002 by the US for the indefinite detention of people without trial. The US military officially acknowledged holding 779 prisoners in the camp, and 700 of whom 772 have been released, and 41 people still remain there. That's after 16 years, there are still 41 people there. President Obama did promise to close the prison, but he failed to deliver it, and over the course of the time, 9 people have died. They say that they killed themselves, but apparently they were actually tortured to death by the CIA. And of course, the injustice continues. At the time of recording, Abu Zubaydah is still in prison, along with 40 other people. Abu Zubaydah is innocent. He is innocent of there are no charges held against him, but he is innocent. He did not work together with Osama bin Laden, and he did not participate in the attacks against America. Apparently, according to the research that I have done, Abu Zubaydah now experiences extremely bad headaches. He is very, very susceptible to small noises. He has multiple fits a day. Remember, walling was one of the techniques that was used against him, literally repeatedly banging his head against walls. And what really fascinates me about this story is how can this man be alive at the end of these intolerable experiences? How can he even, make thoughts? How can his mind function at the end of this the whole time? But obviously his mind is still functioning in a way, because he's been able to put together all of these images, and it must have taken him quite a long time to put together all of these images. But the purpose, as he said, and as it states in the report, the purpose of the drawings that he wanted to do was to also share what had happened, not only to him, but to other people in Guantanamo Bay. And there will never be justice for Abu Zubaydah. There will never be justice for him. What has been done to him is unchangeable. He will probably be held in detention until he dies. The hell that he's already gone through is so bad that it has severely affected his mind. It has severely affected his brain. Adam Curtis says that he cannot even remember the face of his mother or the voice of his father. But basically, my point in summary is that there cannot be justice for Abu Zubaydah. And so what I think the only thing that we can possibly do, if this story or if the story of the other people in Guantanamo really upset you, and they should upset us, we should be shocked and horrified at what has happened to this man, is to literally just say his name. Like, that's why I got that t-shirt printed, because I thought that if I walked down the street and I had a top, who is Abu Zubaydah, with a question mark, somebody might see me and be like, who is Abu Zubaydah? And then they might Google it. And then they might find out about his story. I think just for people to know about his story is one of the most significant things that we can do, because he will never get justice. Even if he is released, it will not be justice, because the damage has already been done, right? And so for us to understand in the West, I believe it is our obligation and our duty to recognize the hypocrisies that are inherent within our Western societies and to challenge these, to fundamentally challenge these. If you can make a comparison between Guantanamo Bay and Sednaya Prison, who are you and who do you think that you are in the world? And that is that is honestly one of the most important things that we can challenge. So ask the question, who is Abu Zubaydah and what on earth happened to him?
Girl, I know it ain't been easy.